everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into the absolute masterclass of survival and creativity that is the century-long evolution of Japanese animation. We're going to tell the whole story, right from the start until now. It's an incredible look at how incredibly strict limitations and just pure, scrappy ingenuity birth a completely unique global art form. So let's kick things off with a pretty massive question to get us thinking. How exactly did a tiny, localized 3-second experiment transform into the 3.8 trillion yen cultural juggernaut we know today? Because, spoiler alert, it wasn't an overnight success, and it definitely wasn't born from massive studio budgets. It was born entirely out of necessity. To figure out how they pulled that off, we've broken this explainer down into 5 distinct eras. The earliest moving pictures, the god of manga, the golden age of cell, the digital revolution, and finally, a global cultural phenomenon. Let's jump right in. Starting off with Section 1, the earliest moving pictures and the dawn of Japanese animation, taking us back to the 1900s through the 1920s. To map this out, we're dropping our first pin way back at the rumored 1907 origin with Katsudo Shashin, then jumping to the oldest surviving professional film in 1917, and finally looking ahead to the absolute game-changer Astro Boy in 1963. Our story really kicks off with this tiny, fascinating fragment known as Katsudo Shashin. We're talking about a 3-second novelty, just 50 frames. It shows a young boy in a sailor suit writing the kanji for moving picture on a board, taking his hat off and giving a quick salute. And get this, the frames were stenciled directly onto his strip of celluloid. It was likely just an experiment for private viewing, but it proves that the itch to create animated motion was there right at the dawn of the 20th century. But here's the real kicker. As Western animation started reaching Japan, local artists obviously wanted in on the action. But imported Western celluloid was just prohibitively expensive. They literally couldn't afford that fluid frame-by-frame realism that early American studios were doing. So what do? You adapt. Pioneer Junichi Kochi animated the 1917 comedic short Namakura Gatana, or The Dull Sword, using flat, jointed paper cutouts sliding across painted backgrounds. From literally day one, these severe financial constraints forced a highly stylized artistic direction. They had to favor creative storytelling over kinetic realism, and that set the DMA for everything that followed. Which brings us perfectly to Section 2, the god of manga, focusing on Osamu Tezuka and the television revolution in the 1960s. Now, Tezuka desperately wanted to bring his intricate stories to television, but TV budgets were brutal. To survive, he systematized a concept that is basically the bedrock of modern anime, limited animation. Instead of drawing 24 unique frames for every single second of footage, he dropped the frame rate to maybe 8 or 12. He relied heavily on repeating cycles and static poses, choosing to prioritize really striking visual compositions instead of smooth, continuous movement. When Tezuka formed Mushi Production in 1961, they had to pump out Astro Boy as a weekly series on an absolute shoestring budget. To make it work, they used looping walk cycles and those incredibly dramatic held-still frames. They focused the actual movement only on the most expressive parts of a character, like those oversized eyes and mouths, while the rest of the body just stayed static. It's wild to think about, but anime's signature big eyes and dramatic poses weren't just purely artistic quirks. They were scrappy, necessary cost-cutting measures that literally birthed the modern anime look. Those brilliant shortcuts completely paved the way for Section 3, the golden age of cell. This is the era of unbelievable physical craftsmanship in the 1980s and 90s that gave us massive hits like Akira and Sailor Moon. The production pipeline during this golden age was, honestly, a physical marvel. Just think about the painstaking labor involved here. First, you're storyboarding the sequence. Then, teams of artists are hand-drawing individual frames onto clear acetate sheets, called cells. After that, an entirely different team comes in to hand-paint every single cell from behind using gouache or acrylics. Finally, you take all these layered cells, place them over a background, and photograph them sequentially under a massive multiplane camera. And the biggest takeaway here is that this grueling, hands-on process created something really special, a unique intimacy. Because human hands were physically painting every frame, you get these subtle brush strokes, slight lighting inconsistencies, and a real physical interplay of shadow. It created a warmth and an aesthetic charm, that human touch, that a lot of fans still fiercely debate losing today. Which leads us to a massive turning point. Section 4, the digital revolution, where we shift from paint to pixels in the late 90s and 2000s. It's like night and day when you look at this leap. With traditional cell animation, the physical limits were very real. I mean, if you made a mistake painting a cell, you literally had to scrape the paint off and start over. But then you bring in the digital ink and paint workflow and it changes everything. Suddenly, you have digital tablets, gradient fill tools, instant undo buttons, and virtual compositing software completely replacing those massive physical cameras. It allowed for rapid revisions and incredibly complex lighting effects that were previously impossible. And this shift happened fast. In 1997, powerhouse studio Toei Animation made the leap to digital using retest software for their Dr. Slump remake. By the year 2000, almost all the major studios had completely abandoned physical cells. Now, obviously, this allowed studios to meet a booming global demand way faster and cheaper, but it sparked a huge divide. Purists argued that the art form lost its warm, artistic soul in the process. Interestingly, today we actually see a lot of studios using hybrid approaches, purposely using digital brushes to simulate those old, gritty analog textures. All of this relentless innovation brings us to today. Section 5, a global cultural phenomenon. Let's talk about the streaming era and beyond. To really understand where anime is at right now, the data is just staggering. As of 2023, international market revenue, sitting at 1,722 billion yen, has officially eclipsed the domestic Japanese market revenue of 1,624 billion yen. Think about that. Anime is absolutely no longer just a Japanese export. It is a totally borderless medium driven by a global audience. Looking at the whole picture, the entire broad market size for anime recently soared to a record-breaking 3.8 trillion yen. That is a mind-blowing financial peak, driven almost entirely by internet distribution, global streaming partnerships, and a massive surge in international merchandising. This scrappy, budget-constrained experiment from the 1960s is literally a multi-trillion yen empire today. But even with all this unprecedented financial success, there's still a lot of deep reflection happening inside the industry. Legendary creators like Hayao Miyazaki have offered some pretty sharp critiques. He's famously argued that modern anime fails to portray real humanity and replaces it with an otaku's fantasy. He's really questioning if this modern, digitally streamlined, mass-produced era is losing its connection to genuine human experience. It's a heavy debate, and it touches on the very core of what anime is supposed to be. So I'm going to leave you with this final thought to chew on. If the entire century-long history of anime was defined by its incredible ability to innovate around strict physical and financial limitations, what happens to its artistic soul now that those limits are essentially gone? As tech keeps evolving, how is the next generation going to preserve that human touch? It's a huge question for the future of the medium. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring the incredible art behind the animation.